Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Ian Kavat. China has announced a new defense budget of $245 billion, a 7.2% increase on last year. And US President Donald Trump has addressed Congress, explaining, among other things, his decision to pause military aid to Ukraine. What do new challenges from Washington and old threats from Beijing mean for Taiwan? To discuss this and more, I'm joined by my special guest, Mark Montgomery, retired Admiral of the US Navy, Foundation for Defense of Democracies Senior Fellow, Cyber Solarium Commission Executive Director, and Tony Hu, former US Department of Defense Senior Director for China, Taiwan and Mongolia. Very warm welcome to both of you on the show today.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
China's announced its new defense budget. It's the same increase, 7.2%, as last year. Now, experts actually believe that China spends a lot more than it publicly states. So do these figures that have come out of the two sessions mean anything in terms of our understanding of China's military intentions towards Taiwan?
So first, I'm glad you mentioned that, it's hard to really peg what the Chinese defense budget is. Most American analysts think it's about double what they report. Some of our senators have claimed even triple, but I think I'm there with the double. But what they get from their military budget is significantly more because their labor costs are lower than the United States, both for service members, but also for shipbuilding and building aircraft. So what's it mean? It's really a relative thing. How is it pacing previous years? And it's once again going up about 7.5%. This is despite the fact that their economic targets as a country are slightly lower than previous years. So what it means to me is Chairman Xi is continuing to focus on defense spending and on building the capability to keep the United States out of the first and second island chains. And when you look at what they purchased with the money, it's definitely weapons that are area denial, anti-access. In other words, weapons that keep the United States forces from easily supporting Taiwan or Japan or the Philippines, depending on the scenario.
Right. And Tony, on Taiwan, Li Qiang, the Premier, said that Beijing will resolutely oppose Taiwan independence and interference by external forces. I believe that's what Mark was just mentioning. Despite the economic problems, they're still very focused on keeping the US out.
Yeah, I think he's responding to United States in the recent State Department published policy toward Taiwan that we remove that does not support our independence. I think they misunderstood the fact that even though we removed that, we haven't really changed our policy because the policy has always been Taiwan's ability to have self-determination. So United States will always support Taiwan's determination for its own future through a democratic process. So nothing has changed, but I think China is worried that something has changed.
And on that worried about change, I wanted to ask you, Mark, whether you read any increased urgency on China's part for this preparation for war over Taiwan. Let me give you two examples. So Li at the two sessions pledged to strengthen combat readiness, safeguard national sovereignty and push forward military civilian reforms. But perhaps more tellingly, before two sessions, she had ordered three kinds of military reforms, and the goal was to prioritize combat readiness as the foremost duty, with a fundamental orientation of preparing for and engaging in warfare. Or is that just more the same?
No, I do think that this is a different tenor from Chinese Communist Party leadership, and this is coming because they have successfully completed five-year plans of procurement. Procurement aimed, since the third Taiwan Straits crisis in 95, 96, five-year plans of procurement aimed solely at this, what I mentioned earlier, this anti-access area denial, this development of the Chinese ability to move the U.S. away. One of the problems is, procurement's not enough. You must train and exercise with that gear. And I believe, Chairman Xi now realizes that at this point, he needs to have a higher level of readiness, a higher level of operational availability in his forces if he's going to do some kind of significant military event like a cross-strait invasion. So it makes sense that at this point he would begin to shift to that. And this is much more complicated than one would think. Interoperability among forces combat readiness, these are things that the United States has earned through 50 or 60 years of joint operations since the Vietnam War, and 50 or 60 years of almost consistent combat, so that our forces are at a different level of operational readiness than probably the PLA, People's Liberation Army, and Navy and Air Force are at on a day-to-day basis. So I think it's smart, it's wise for Chairman Xi to have turned to this, to pivot to this kind of recommendation and reform.
The recent drills that China held, Tony, at the end of February, 40 nautical miles off southwest of Taiwan. Sorry, let me ask Mark, is that the kind of exercises that you said that they need to have more of this sort of joint combat?
That's exactly it. So there's two types of exercises we've been watching recently. One where they are able to organize large amounts of forces, whether they're Army battalions or air assault units with helicopters or amphibious shipping being brought together in preparation, for practicing some sort of major event, cross-strait invasion type event. So that the first part is, can you get those forces together? Then the second part is, can they integrate fires and maneuver and capabilities together? So this was one of those exercises, but we saw throughout 2024 the kind of larger ones where they organize forces, increasingly larger sizes of amphibious and ground forces. I suspect next year we'll begin to see them marrying those together.
How would they integrate the ground forces unless that was on their own territory?
So the ground forces would embark on amphibious ships, or they would load into helicopters. The helicopters would then fly a mission of about the length of a cross-strait flight, but into a China, PLA Army training area. The amphibious ships might go out and then pull into another port or pull into a simulated beach landing environment. To me, that's the next level of kind of operational training and readiness, and I think they've already done a little bit of it, and we can expect to see a lot more of it as they flex their muscles and demonstrate capability, which has its own effect on Taiwan. You don't have to invade to introduce challenges and resilience issues into the U.S.-Taiwan relationship.
Absolutely. And Tony, why do you think China failed to go through with the promise of the live fire component, or was that planned?
I suspect that was planned because they want to see how much disruption they can create without actually doing a live fire. I suspect they will move into a live fire near Taiwan next time when they see something that they don't like, because they want to escalate. They want to have a way to get a higher level of threat. So this time I think they got so close and they disrupt the civilian area and sea traffic. They want to just see what kind of impact they can create. And I suspect they're reserving the actual live fire near Taiwan the next time they're unhappy with Taiwan. As you know, they do live fire exercises, but as for Taiwan audience, they always do this exercise near the coast in their territorial water. They have not done live fire near Taiwan.
Absolutely. The joint sword exercises, drills in 2024 weren't actually a live fire. Tony, I'll stay on you. Something you were talking about, trying to introduce this defeatist attitude. There's another sort of narrative that's going on. China says that Taiwan was hyping those drills, which they called routine, and yet, as we discussed, there have never been live fire drills so close to Taiwan. So how does that Chinese narrative work for you?
I don't think it is working. I think, once again, the primary purpose, obviously, is intimidation of Taiwan people. And I think they might have miscalculated the kind of psychological effect, the reverse psychological effect that's having in Taiwan, because the type of disruption that they cause in Taiwan actually cause the people in Taiwan more. It actually hype up more anti-China feelings, so makes peaceful resolution might be more difficult. Therefore, I suspect they might not understand the full impact, the secondary impact of this type of action.
And they also seem to be saying, Mark, that we can threaten you, but you can't say anything about that.
No, I agree. This is part of a maximum pressure campaign. So they're doing, I think every day China is doing a cyber-enabled economic warfare campaign against Taiwan. Some of it is against financial systems, some's against electrical power communications, but there's a portion of it that's against the population. And whether it's through actual events like this or false narratives that they plant in Taiwan social media, or overt threats by their foreign ministry, it's all an effort to reduce the comfortability of the Taiwan people and to reduce the credibility of the Taiwan government.
And perhaps also the US, which we will get onto a little bit later. But Mark, staying on you, so Donald Trump has paused military aid to Ukraine and seems to be, from what we've seen in terms of the talks with Russia, that they are rehabilitating Russia. Now, Taiwan, as you know, follows its values by standing with Ukraine. It has, from the very start of the war, it appears to be a US policy reversal on Ukraine. Ukraine versus Russia. Could the US do the same on Taiwan versus China, on South versus North Korea? Is that a justifiable question to be asking?
Well, it's certainly not for me to tell people when to be worried, but here's how I look at it. And I train the Ukraine military routinely a few weeks every quarter. So I'm in there, I see this is going to have an impact. The United States is about 50% of military assistance that flows into Ukraine, and we're 50% that can't be easily replaced, particularly in things like air defense missiles, long-range artillery, short-range, long-range strike, short-range artillery. And so if this pause were to stay in effect for weeks or months, it would have a significant impact on Ukraine's ability to fight Russia. It doesn't mean they would have to capitulate, but it would be tough. So you should read into this that it's a serious issue. I think it's President Trump bringing a maximum pressure campaign against President Zelensky. A little bit, he was doing it anyway, but then after the poor meeting in the White House, it's gotten worse. I do think President Zelensky can extricate Ukraine from this, and I think he will by signing the strategic minerals deal and saying that the meeting didn't go well and maybe he was to blame. It's not the best look for the United States, but I understand it was a maximum pressure campaign. Now, after this is over, I would hope that President Trump then puts a maximum pressure campaign on Russia and Vladimir Putin. Now, if he does that, Taiwan should feel very comfortable. If he doesn't, then Taiwan could still feel comfortable thinking that President Trump always said he was going to, and his team have said they're going to prioritize the Pacific over Europe, and this is just them getting there faster. Still, though, I understand why some in Taiwan would look at our withdrawal from Afghanistan and look at this and say, is the United States a credible ally or partner? So I'm very much hoping that President Trump recognizes the failure that Afghanistan was and recognizes he can't repeat that in Ukraine and maintain a credible position in the world.
Right. And Tony, I mentioned values. Does morality matter when we can see Trump is trying to throw everything at stopping this war, stopping the deaths? Because it was Russia, the Russian side that invaded Ukraine in the first place. But what we seem to have seen over the past few weeks is, the comment about Zelensky being a dictator, who started the war, the UN resolution on the 3rd anniversary of Ukraine, where there was an equivalence that was adopted between the two sides in the UN Security Council. Does morality matter?
Absolutely, because for a country to remain credible as a leader of the world, we must maintain the morality. And like Admiral said, right now I believe President Trump is focusing on completing the war in Europe and put it to stop to it so that he can focus in Asia. And he's so focused on that he's taking drastic measures that's unconventional. And so I think that's what we're seeing now. I don't think the people in Taiwan should read too much into it, because his staff have mentioned again and again that China is our pacing threat, and we must take care of it for U.S. national security reasons. So I have no doubt that ultimately Taiwan will remain a critical U.S. national interest.
Can I follow up on that? First of all, it is absolutely inappropriate and wrong for us to to say Russia did not start this war. They started the war. It's inappropriate and wrong to call President Zelensky a dictator. He's not a dictator. They're not having elections right now because they're in martial law. And having been there, I don't see any way you could effectively run elections right now, particularly in the Russian-occupied areas. And then third, it was wrong to vote. Our vote at the United Nations was wrong. The United States represents more than that. Now, I understand President Trump fancies himself a disruptor. And this is a great disruption he's doing. Unfortunately, it has the risk of destabilization. So I wish we were being more careful in our language and probably had started the maximum pressure campaign against Russia at the same time. But we have to withhold judgment till we see how this plays out over the next 2 to 3 months.
Absolutely. And I think what you had said earlier about now you hope that the maximum pressure campaign can turn and pivot onto Russia itself. If it does not, how will this influence China's thinking on its intention to take Taiwan?
So first, it is not good for Taiwan's relations with China for authoritarians to be doing well elsewhere. So for Russia to achieve success in Ukraine emboldens the Chinese Communist Party, I think, to some degree. Now, look, from my perspective, we always have to prepare for the most dangerous scenario, the idea of a cross-strait invasion. But the most likely scenario is what I mentioned earlier, this kind of cyber-enabled economic warfare, this campaign to break the resilience of Taiwan. What I'm afraid of is that the more success the only thing that stops that happening right now is the belief that Chairman Xi has that he might not win a cross-strait invasion. You don't start the cyber-enabled economic warfare unless you know that if it escalates, you're okay at the top level.
You can follow through.
That's right. This kind of a Russian victory, even if it's a little Pyrrhic in Ukraine, emboldens him to say, you know what, I'll have success. If it really gets to that level in Taiwan, the United States doesn't have the backbone or the gumption to stay with this issue. Once he believes that, I believe he immediately begins to ratchet up the pressure on Taiwan and see how far he can go without the US or Japan or Australia or Europe responding. And that would be unhealthy for Taiwan.
Yeah, because I wanted to bring in the Greek historian Thucydides. This particular saying, the strong do what they can, or sometimes will, the strong do what they will, and the weak suffer what they must. In some of the Chinese media, they have been drawing conclusions and saying, well, Trump respects power, therefore in the China-Taiwan issue, Trump would not stand up to China.
So certainly, historically, that has not been the U.S. position. We do not, China walks around and says to many neighbors, we're a big country, you're a small country, get in alignment. We historically haven't done that. I hope there's a return to a future where we don't act like that. The U.S. Congress does not believe that. And in the United States, while much of the foreign policy resides with the executive, the ability to really execute things and the resources to do it ride with the legislature. So I'm hoping the legislature can temper some of President Trump's more aggressive actions in support of that. Plus, I'm not 100% sure that he isn't going to bring, as I said, that maximum that pressure campaign against Russia as well. But I'm not surprised China reads a lot into what President Trump is doing because it feeds their narrative of how Taiwan should be treated. You can see it in the Serbian press, how they speak about Kosovo. You see every authoritarian taking advantage of U.S. apparent flip-flopping in position to say, of course, great powers should be able to exert their way over the weak.
So, Tony, we had better hope that pivot to the maximum pressure campaign on Putin and Russia comes quickly, because otherwise what happens to U.S. deterrence if the belief is that the U.S. wouldn't actually do anything?
Yeah, that actually creates a very dangerous situation. As Admiral Montgomery said, that gives Xi Jinping a little bit of hope that he's going to succeed, and we cannot allow him to ever think that way. So it actually will increase the instability in the region when we're trying to maintain stability. So I think U.S. need to continue to ensure that we express strongly that our desire to maintain the status quo, don't try to alter it, and also in the meantime building those deterrence factors such as building coalitions of like-minded countries who cares about Taiwan's democracy and continue to express their support for Taiwan. Therefore, maintain that pressure on China, saying don't make a foolish decision because we're here.
Let's turn to perhaps some victories that obviously Trump can claim. The biggest one in terms of Taiwan is TSMC has agreed to invest a further $100 billion in the Arizona complex. 65 billion so far, covers 3 fabs, we expect. This would then remove the 25% tariff on TSMC chips that Trump had announced. So is Trump actually a brilliant negotiator? Is that the way that we need to be looking at this, as you say, to wait until we get the final result?
Look, there's no doubt that Trump's more aggressive stance will yield some economic changes like this. Look, do I think TSMC's investment in the United States is a good thing for the United States? Yes. But TSMC did it for TSMC in Taiwan. It was the right move.
You mean to avoid the tariffs?
To avoid the tariffs. It was the right move because this is how you deal with President Trump. If you want to know perfectly how to deal with President Trump, study the late Prime Minister Abe's performance as Prime Minister of Japan during the first Trump administration. I think he handled Trump very well. He acknowledged the tariffs. He said, what action can we do together? And he and they came to resolution. Prime Minister Ishibe, in his visit with Trump last month, did that exact same thing. I think he announced $1 trillion worth of investment. I think much of it was pre-existing, but still, it's a big number. President Trump liked it. $100 billion is a big number from one company. President Trump liked it. I think TSMC did the right thing. I think that's how Taiwan would do it. And with Taiwan uniquely, it kind of has to be done by companies because of what I think are legacy and no longer necessary limitations on interactions between Taiwan's political leadership and U.S. political leadership. It's, President Li can't just fly to Washington and have a meeting, but the TSMC leadership can. So they did a great thing for Taiwan, and I think the Taiwan government's doing a good job orchestrating this.
Right. And Tony, actually I want to make reference to an interview that Mark did in the US just very recently. It was after your first trip to Taiwan a couple of weeks ago, and you had said that for Taiwan, its greatest concern, 9 out of 10 it's concerned with the CCP, but then 7 out of 10 it has concerns over the new Trump administration. So Tony, if we can see, the $100 billion investment by TSMC, there's also talks of possibly $8–10 billion in a new arms sale, buying American weapons. Also, we know that President Li has increased the GDP, the defense budget as a proportion of GDP to 3%, using a special budget to do that, to oppose the opposition. Can this begin to ease that level of concern because of the changes that this would bring from the Trump administration in its relations towards Taiwan?
Absolutely, because one of the things that President Trump have said was, you got to help yourself. And he has requested NATO countries to increase the defense budget, and Taiwan has taken initiative on its own to increase defense budget and has demonstrated more determination to defend Taiwan. So I think this is all movement to the right direction, and we should see more positive results from Taiwan's action from the United States, such as some of the arms sale requests should come through. But I look forward to a more positive relationship under this, because Taiwan has taken initiative to take action first, just like TSMC.
Can I pick up on that? I did say 9 out of 10 for the CCP and 7 out of 10 for Trump. I would say it's normally 5 out of 10 for the United States. In other words, there's always a concern in Taiwan, is the United States willing to fight for us? And I think I said in the same interview, I have a son on a ship on a U.S. destroyer in Japan. He's there, and he and the men and women on his ship believe they're there to fight for beleaguered democracies like Taiwan, to fight for Japan, as part of a Western democratic pushback against authoritarian aggression. That is not fully shared in the United States. Many Americans would struggle to find Taiwan on a map. A conflict the worst case conflict between the United States and Japan over Taiwan could cost between 7,000 and 25,000 American lives, many more Taiwan lives. But for us, that's 7,000 or 25,000 Americans. That's more than we lost in Iraq and Afghanistan in 20 years. And that would happen in a period of months in most exercises I run. Now look, I think it's very unlikely that we devolve to that kind of fight, but we have to do a very good job in our country explaining why countries like Taiwan and Israel and Ukraine matter when they're being subjected to the jackboot of an authoritarian. And we'll always have a 5 out of 10, in a country. We come to it till we have made it clear that that's what we stand for. Those are the values and morals we stand for. So everything Taiwan can do to help the United States, to prevent the president from becoming unhappy, is good, so that other people can begin to sell and make clear the reason we do these things.
Okay, we're going to have to end it there. Thank you so much, Admiral Montgomery and Tony Hu, for joining Taiwan Talks today. If you liked our show, please search for us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up and hit subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching today.